Welcome to the Chase MedSearch podcast, the place where we dive deep into the medical device sales industry by discussing the current trends, timeless philosophies, and amazing experiences that shape our niche of the industry. Join me, Jordan Chase, on a guided tour as I speak with established sales leaders and professionals as they share stories that will help you get in, stay in, and thrive in your medical device sales career. Let's start the show. Welcome back to the Chase MedSearch podcast. We have an excellent returning guest today. My guest, Jon Alwinson, is the author of Relentless Sales. He was raised in Orlando, Florida, and brings over 15 years of sales experience. He's achieved many sales accolades, both as an individual sales contributor and as a regional sales manager in medical devices. As a salesperson, Jon has won Rookie of the Year, Territory Manager of the Year, Founders Award, which is best 2 years combined, President's Club, and has helped lead his team to multiple Region of the Year awards. As a regional sales manager, Jon has led his team to first or second place finishes 5 out of 6 years at one point, has coached and developed Rookie of the Year award winners, Rep of the Year winners, and each year coaches one more Territory Manager to achieve President's Club. We had him on before, and by popular demand, he is back. Jon, welcome back to the Chase MedSearch podcast.
Jordan, thanks so much for having me. It's an honor to be back with you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, delighted to have you back. And your book, Relentless Sales, which we will put the link to in the show notes, is one that I recommend all the time to all kinds of people, experienced reps. I end up having lots and lots of conversations with people that want to break into medical sales. That has become a regular part of the email package that I send to folks that are referred to me about advice on how to break in, and then once you're in, what to do. It's an invaluable resource, and I highly recommend it. I want to talk Relentless Sales with you. We worked our way through some of the book last time you were on, and one of the things that stood out to me in your book is a whole conversation around the Eddie Award, which is not the actual title of that award, but a sales rep had finished number one in your organization 2 years straight prior to you arriving. And your first year there, he was number one again. Why'd you want to be number one?
That's such a good question. I think if your listeners to this podcast will probably feel the same way. I think there's just an inherent desire to compete, and I think from day one, I've always been kind of the scrawny, skinny basketball player growing up. And so I think that kind of chip on the shoulder kind of stuck with me throughout my adult life, right or wrong. I think it's kind of a little bit of environment, but also how God's wired me.
Yeah, that's great. Tell us about Eddie. What was he like?
Yeah. So in fact, this guy just kept winning. So I was part of a small medical device company from 2015 through the end of 16. And they built this award just for him because he was hyper talented. So he was so talented out of New York City that this small medical device company said, we've got to build a big financial award to keep a guy like this in place. And so he kind of had this aura about him. He had this presence, all justified. He was worth every penny they spent on him. But everyone kind of just assumed that award was going to go to Eddie every year.
Nice. What did you think when you got there and you heard about this guy and you met him, and I assume you interacted with him and talked to him? What was he doing differently than anybody else, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think he just was seasoned in so many different ways. I think he had the smarts, he had the strategic mindset, and he had the relationship building skills. And there wasn't really any holes in his games. Just kind of compare him to like a LeBron James. Like if you're stepping on a basketball court, you've got a 6'10" guy who can dribble, shoot, do all the things and is powerful. He kind of had that same aura in our medical device company. He could do it all. And that was kind of the aura he brought when you walked into him.
Nice. So I know you're a goal-oriented guy. How did you identify how you were going to be number one?
Well, I think this self-belief and confidence, we talk about confidence in chapter 4. And I think when you build and are doing the right things consistently over time, you build that confidence. And so, I talk about in the book, when everyone was like, look, Eddie's going to win it again. There was a point where middle of the year, I was staying really close to him. And at some point, I remember a phrase that either a basketball coach or someone said to me is like, hey, someone's got to win. It might as well be you. And I looked at myself and I said, I can do this. About mid-year, I was like, I can beat this guy. And I don't, at first, the beginning of the year, I didn't think I could. But once we got mid-year and I saw the numbers and I was staying close to him and pacing him, I was like, look, I want this. I'm more hungry than he is. And I think that's the mentality you have to bring in medical device.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Tell us about the goal setting process. I mean, that's something that, we hear about. Some colleges, business schools talk to people about doing it. Many don't. In terms of developing a process for setting goals. How did you know which goals to set? How did you know they were the right ones? Take us through that, because I think that's an important part of your success, is that you're very goal oriented. And then you seem very meticulous about writing them down, looking at them, that kind of thing. Take us through that.
Yeah, so I don't know if it was like a John Maxwell or something like that, but I read something years ago about writing your goals and then putting them in places that you can kind of see throughout the day. So I'm a big believer in kind of shoot for the stars, and if you fall short, you're still higher than you would have if you didn't kind of shoot for the stars. And so my first year as a rookie, I wrote become the rookie of the year on or before December 15th, 2015, right? And that was way back when, but I'm a big believer in SMART goals. So specific, measurable, realistic, time bound, so write your SMART goals down. And then visually, I think your subconscious looks at them so kind of your annual goals, write those big, audacious goals down, put them in places where you can kind of see them. And then you kind of do those gut checks with yourself once a week. Like, am I doing the things I need to be doing to become rookie of the year or rep of the year? And I think subconsciously your mind kind of starts going in that appropriate direction for those big yearly goals. Now, I think you can create monthly, weekly goals from there and quarterly goals. But I think start with the end in mind, start with where you want to be at the end of the year, and then kind of work your way back to the point where I even have, my top 3 goals for the next day that I write down the night before. And it's just been something that has organically grown and I've seen success from that I think your audience could really benefit from.
Yeah. And I should be mentioning that you have a website, jonalwinson.com, right? And it's chock full of resources there, templates, these kinds of worksheets and things like that. I find that to be very helpful for folks. In your book, you reference a phrase called competitive greatness. Talk to us about that, what that means to you.
Yeah, I love just competing. I'm hardwired in it. And again, I've always been kind of the scrappy, skinny basketball player I see myself as, where I stepped on a court with people a lot stronger, bigger. And, I think, John Wooden, I think coined that phrase of competitive greatness. But I think when you focus on just competing and giving your best, I think the fear of quota, the fear of being good enough, I think fear kind of trickles away when you just say, I'm going to come out and I'm going to do my best. I'm going to give it all I have. I think fear subsides when you focus on just competing and doing the best you can.
Yeah. Related to that, I think you had another bit of advice in there: out plan, out execute, and out hustle your competition every single day.
Yeah.
Is that how you guide your reps?
It is. It's one of our core. It's our third core value. And, we take care of our customer always is number 1. Character counts is number 2. And then what you just said, out plan, out execute, and out hustle our competitors daily. I was handed a business card when I was with my first medical device company, and it had those 3 pillars on it. And it's just something that I truly, deeply believe in. Planning, executing, hustling, and those are the things we can control. And when we do that and we compete to win, putting our customers first, it is, I think, the right recipe for success.
Now, I know Eddie's a friend. What was his face like when you got up there to accept an award that they'd created for him?
You know what? He is a great man, super humble. I think you kind of see the tide changing a little bit in sales. So what's cool about sales is there's always a scoreboard in front of you. So I think he was very happy that someone, stepped up and competed. And I think it only made him want to do better moving forward. And so he was very humble, very gracious. And, I think he was kind of part of him. Obviously he wanted the big financial award, but he was happy for me at a friend level.
Yeah, that's great. Great reps compete with others in a typically spirit of friendliness in the organization with teammates and peers and folks. But then there's always the folks outside that aren't part of your organization. Tell us a story or two about a competitive rep that was really, really good outside your organization that you had to think about and ultimately win. But I'd love to hear that side of it for you. How you think when you got somebody that's a genuinely tough opponent out there.
It's kind of interesting because sometimes these competitors, you don't know if they're good because of the product they sell, partly
Mm-hmm.
the organization they represent. But what's been fun is I've competed strongly against, I think of a guy that I actually work with now that I competed against back when, and they do all those same things really, really well. I think they've got great relationship building skills. They know how to, number one and foremost, they know the ins and outs of their products, and they're so highly detailed to how their products work within either a surgeon or physician's workflow that they bring so much value first and have strong relationships, strong organization skills, and strong business acumen that are real fun. But I think of two different guys. I think a guy named Travis. I think of a guy named Christian who I competed against in the greater Atlanta market. That actually I have friendships with both of those guys now, but back then was more giving them the eyeball when we ran into each other throughout the years.
Uh-huh. Absolutely. How did you end up coming out on top?
It's kind of like a cake. It's very difficult to know what exactly makes the cake taste great. It's probably all the pieces of the recipe, right? And so, I think the biggest thing that I did, which was willing to go the extra mile. So doing education nights for physicians,
Mm-hmm.
really spending the extra time with the staff to make sure that they knew I was for them, that I had internal staff advocates. So when competition was in my accounts, they tip me off and say, hey, look, XYZ's here. And so I think when you take care of people well, they want to take care of you. So I think I did a few extra things to win against them throughout the years. One, I would say the staff, building staff advocates and internal champions. And then two, being willing to sacrifice a little bit of personal time with my family to meet and really deeply understand the priorities and goals of these physicians, to understand that and show them that my product solution was a better fit. So I think those are the two extra things that I did that can be very helpful.
That's great. Some good advice there. A theme that you hit a couple times, and I want to explore it because a lot of work in sales is fairly repetitive and can be monotonous. I know all of us have those things in our job where we're like, okay, I know it's part of what I got to do, but it's just this is very boring for me to do. And there's aspects in my job like that. But something, an interesting phrase that I got some energy out of was do common things in an uncommon way. Tell us a little bit about how you lean into that when job's repetitive, it's monotonous, there's aspects to it that just are like eating, oatmeal that isn't cooked. Tell us about that.
Yeah, such a good, and I think Dabo Sweeney quoted a founding father of that, and I got that through Dabo, and I think Dabo is so good at firing people up, his staff and his players, and he's like, if you're gonna bring someone coffee, you bring them the best coffee in the history of coffee, and so just those things like you said that are boring and monotonous. There's so much in sales that are that are boring and monotonous,
Mm-hmm.
but whatever you do, I kind of get this from a spiritual side, do unto the glory of God has kind of always been kind of ingrained in my mind. So whether I'm selling copiers or whether I'm selling medical device products or whatever I'm doing, I want to be excellent in my work because my why is a little bit bigger than myself. It's kind of a point to God as much as I can. I'm not perfect by any means, but I have a deep why. And so I would encourage your listeners to understand their why. I think Simon Sinek has a good book on knowing your why that I'd recommend, but defining that for yourself And then kind of living from that is invigorating, and that will keep you consistent, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think somewhat related to that is Project Squeegee. Tell us about
Mm.
Project Squeegee.
Yes. So there was a time just a few years ago where my team, we just won region of the year. I was looking at some of my best players, and they just worked their tail off for me, right? And for themselves. And I remember my guy in Birmingham looking at me and saying, "Dude, I've got nothing else. Like, what, John? How are you going to lift quota on me 10 more percent? I just gave you X amount over quota last year."
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, you're right. I mean, he kind of has, but our good can always get better, right? And so this crazy thought came to mind where I don't know if I was going through Home Depot one weekend or not, where I saw a box of squeegees. And I was like, we're going to squeegee the heck out of our territory. And it doesn't matter if it's a $5 product or a $5,000 product. We're going to find something in every market for every customer that we can sell. And so, I would encourage your listeners, if they find themselves at a spot where they feel like they've done everything, they probably haven't. And to systematically go through every product and service and solution you sell
Mhm.
and go through every customer and try to make sure you add those up. And what I think your audience will find is there's still a lot of meat left on the bone,
Yeah.
and there's still more wins to be had. And so Project Squeegee came from a team that was already really good and a call to be better. And so what I did is I bought a box of those squeegees and I sent them all to my reps in hard mail. And I was like, hey, we're going to squeegee your territory. Get ready. And we had another great year, in a year where we thought we had kind of tapped out.
Yeah. So true. I find that in my own business, when I've done every single thing I can think of to find a candidate, every single thing. And I've got my team on it. I'm talking to other recruiters sometimes, and there's always more to do. That's
Yep.
something that sticks in my head a lot. It's like, there's just always something else that you can do here, to solve this puzzle. I think as we have this conversation, there's a couple things that delineate in my mind. One is the tasks and activities of sales, and then there's certain foundational principles for success.
Mm-hmm.
And the foundational principles, I think, come first in your mind in the book. And one of those is own the morning. Can you elaborate on that? Owning the morning?
Yeah, I think when you own your morning routine, I think first is be very intentional and create a morning routine. When and how are you most successful, not only from a work perspective, but from a personal perspective? I know for me, if I don't wake up between 5 and 5:30 every day, I'm playing defense throughout the day, and I hate playing defense. I
Hmm.
would rather play offense all day. And so when I wake up, what I do is obviously I get a espresso, some water going, kind of wake myself up for the morning. But I read, I read spiritual stuff, I read the Bible, I read work stuff, articles that I printed off the night before, or tap into a good book. But I find that when I kind of get myself right for the day, I'm better for my family, I'm better for myself, and I'm much better for my organization when I'm going on the offense versus kind of being on my heels and defensive.
Yeah, there's an acronym you have, DOG.
Mm-hmm.
What's that?
Yeah, daily appointment with God. It's a phrase that my dad kind of came up with, and super grateful for my dad. He was a pastor for many years and has a men's ministry in Orlando, Florida now. But he came up with this phrase, and he calls it the dog daily appointment with God. And when you have your dog, whether 5 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever, it just sets yourself up for a day where you can kind of live from your identity. You can be sharp throughout your day and really connect. The main purpose of it is to connect with God before you start your day and kind of deal with all the stresses of the world.
Hmm. That's nice. And there was a section in there on daily affirmations too, which I was curious what yours are, because I didn't see those necessarily listed. So, what does a daily affirmation look like?
Daily affirmations are super important, and they don't even have to be spiritual things, but I think, I can do this. I've been here before. I've got what it takes. When we preach positive stuff to ourselves for the morning, it kicks us off on a right start. I do talk about scripture memorization, kind of that being helpful as well, but I think that mixed with common psychology is a really good combination to where we can kind of fuel up spiritually, but also remind ourselves and arm ourselves that we're going to have challenges come our way, but I can do this. One of the things I have in my calendar still to this day at noon every day is I'm smart and I can figure this out, or I will figure this out.
Yep.
And it pops up every day at noon for me. And it just reminds me that no matter what comes my way, I'm equipped, God's equipped me to figure it out, and I'm going to figure it out. And that kind of positive affirmation I've systematically built in processes in my life to just help me overcome the challenges that are certainly going to be there.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Let's talk entitlement. Who first brought home to you the lesson on entitlement and that no one really owes you anything? That could be demoralizing to some people, but it's actually pretty powerful.
Yeah. I think entitlement is super dangerous. First off, I think we've got a culture and a country full of that right now. And I grew up in a lower middle class or very middle class family, however you want to say it. And my dad always, was like, look, if you want something, you have to work for it. So mowing lawns was always something that we did throughout the years to
Mhm.
make money to buy things we wanted. But really, my older brother, Joel, encompassed this really well. It was funny. We were graduating, me and a handful of friends were graduating college. And one of my buddies was talking about how much he deserved to make, when he graduated. And my brother caught wind of it as he was passing through and said, "What'd you just say?" And I remember seeing my buddy Wes at the time kind of look at him with big eyeballs, and he knew what was coming. And my brother's like, "No one owes you anything."
Right?
He didn't use the word anything. It might have been a 4-letter word. And he kind of put my buddy in his spot. And he's like, that's what's wrong with our country, is thinking just because you went to this university, you're owed XYZ income when you graduate. It'd be great, but no one owes you anything. And so I think it's stuck with me from how I was raised to conversations like that throughout the years, either through my dad or older brother, that entitlement really is dangerous. And I think what it does, it makes us weak and it leads to poor performance. And ultimately, I think mediocrity stems from that when we think we're owed anything. And so I think when we live humbly and we work hard and make effort and character and all those things, the priority and competence, that's really what leads to success. And so that's my encouragement out there is, stay humble. Don't believe you're owed anything, because I think that'll only make you feel weak.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And it's interesting that your first experience is linked with someone getting education and then thinking that that means that they then deserve a certain level of income and status and things like that.
Mhm.
And in my experience, nothing could be further from the truth. I used to work at a company where many people had advanced degrees, PhDs and doctorates, and certainly masters and MBAs and all these things. And I dealt with a lot of candidates that had those degrees as well. And I always felt like the bad guy in the conversation sometimes because they weren't entitled to anything because they'd earned that. You can get it. And I tell people, especially in sales, that's something that you can get, but do it for you first. Don't do it because you think that's going to advance you, because there is, I would imagine the statistical correlation between sales directors, sales managers who have their MBA versus those who don't is very weak. It's not a one-to-one. It's something that, can help you, but like anything else, it's got to be applied. You got to put hard work to it. And I just remember so many people that had targeted school degrees and things like that, if you will, that just weren't going to get where they wanted to go living off that entitlement concept. It's sad.
Totally. It takes away that hard work, doesn't it? Right. So I would take somebody who has a bucket full of hard work and tenacity and relentless mentality over someone who's, Ivy grad,
Hmm.
any day, particularly in sales, because you don't have to be a genius to be in sales. People who buy from people they like, trust,
Yep.
right, and are reliable and hardworking and good character. So yeah, in our space, those Ivy grads and those highly sought after degrees are wonderful, and there's no diss there.
Yep.
But you need to stay relentless, and you need to still have that drive to serve your customers well.
Absolutely. I have a friend who's a recruiter who wrote a letter to his son when he graduated from high school, headed to college. And he said, I've known a lot of people in this job that I've had that have been very successful people. Some of them had prodigious intelligence, but the one thing that all of them had was they were not lazy. And I think there's a little bit of relation to entitlement and laziness in a way that kind of creep together. And that was his insight for his son as he headed off to college was get up.
Yes.
Don't sleep till noon.
Yes.
But Because no one in this life's gonna give you anything, and no one outside these four walls really cares about you the way we do. You know, I like the whole thought process around the art of the question that you get into, and you spend a lot of time on this, and you detail some interactions with your sales team around the art of the question, and you like questions. So
Yeah.
let's talk about that. That can be some people can get a little nervous with questions being asked to them.
It's so important. And I will preface this with you can ask too many questions and tick off your customer. So there's a fine line where emotional intelligence comes in here, where you want to be inquisitive and curious, but
Hmm.
you don't want to be, I had an interview with a guy who was wonderful, but he may have taken that too far on the other extreme and asked so many repeating questions. We're like, dude, you gotta stop. Like that's too many. But I will say a lot of times when you're sitting down with customers and they give you one answer, we let them oftentimes brush by and we don't come back to it. Or we don't stop them and say, hey, I'm so sorry. You mentioned XYZ as an issue. Can you tell me just a little bit more there? I really would like to understand. And as you're talking to them, hopefully you're taking notes. Hopefully you're saying it from a very genuine perspective, but I do think we should, as salespeople, learn to ask second and third level questions. If you don't feel like it's appropriate to interrupt your customer at that point, write it down and then come back to it after they're done talking. And a lot of times it's why, it's tell me more, or can you help me understand? You said this. Can you help me understand why that's important to you right now? And I think it only makes for a more fruitful conversation. If you get the sense that they're lying to you or maybe being slightly misleading, then maybe you add one additional question there
Hmm.
to clarify. But I do think we should do a better job of being inquisitive because I think it builds rapport with customers. And I think it helps you not assume you know what they're thinking.
And it sounds like that goes back to pre-call planning in terms of you don't have to ask every question possible under the sun, but you need to know which questions that you need to ask in that conversation to help advance the ball. Will that be kind of what you're thinking there?
Totally. Yes. I mean, pre-call plan is a staple. Obviously, you know how your products, solutions, services fit within an account. So you're the expert of that, but go in thinking about whatever's on your plate as an organization, whatever you're trying to advance, look at it from both lenses. Look at it from your customer's lens, look at it from your lens the night before, and think through some questions that you need to ask to help your customer, but also to advance your business.
Tell us about the interaction when you're working with folks that report to you in terms of questions. They may not be quite familiar with your process of how you kind of dig into and understand their business a little bit better.
Yeah, yeah, and I think my team's grown to love this about me,
Hmm.
but I will question my team and not let them get away with, BS answers, if you will.
Yeah.
Sometimes in sales, like we try to brush by things and we try to push things under the rug, and we're not always asking the right kind of questions to our customers. So when I look at myself as a sounding board for my team, and I remember one really funny example where we had our team together in Nashville, Tennessee, and we had brought our biggest problems to the table where we were like, let's bring one account where we're stuck, we can't figure it out. And, I remember going around the table and a newer member of my team, she was sharing some things. She was talking about her experience. And I stopped her and I just kept grilling her on her questions to her customers. And I'd peer over and one of my reps here in Atlanta had just an ear to ear smile and he was just holding back his laughter. And then, he's like, man, I asked those questions now because I don't want to have to deal with that from Jon. And then our whole team just started laughing. And
Mhm.
so I think when you have good leadership, good management, they care about you. They want you to be successful with your business, but they won't let you get away with not being acquisitive enough with your customers. And so I got to the point where when I was a rep, I wouldn't leave an account until I mentally thought through the questions I knew my manager was going to ask me because I knew on the ride home he was going to call me and ask me about this. Right. So hopefully that answers your question to a degree. I know it's high level.
No, it's good. And practically, you had an example in the book where you were headed out of town. You'd called on everybody except one person that you knew wasn't bought in or was really on the fence and maybe on the wrong side of the fence. And your manager called you and had some questions for you about that.
Yeah. I was very lucky to have a manager named Justin back in the day when I was an independent contributor, sales rep. And there's one doctor that Jordan, I think your audience could probably relate to this so well. There's one doctor that obviously I checked in with, I kept in within the process. But if there's green, yellow, red, green's for you, yellow is neutral, and red is against you.
Yeah.
He was 100% red. And I knew I had two doctors that were yellow to green, and I knew he was red. And I remember my manager, Justin, I had done everything great with the staff, the clinical team, sterile reprocessing team, and an administrative team, but that one doctor wasn't bought in. And he called me, and I was about ready to hit reverse in my car. And he said, "You better get your you-know-what back in there, and you go talk to him." And I remember like that gulp that we all have as salespeople. We're like, man, I just don't want to have that conversation. Like, I do not want to engage this doctor. He's mean, he's rude, he's abrupt, and it's not going to go well. And I remember putting it in park and saying, "You got it, I'll call you in a minute." And going back in there to the hospital as I just checked out. And had I not gone in there and brought him from like negative to negative neutral or neutral plus, I wouldn't have won rep of the year. Most likely I wouldn't be where I'm at today. I mean, there's so many things that have trickled from that big win that I got just by getting a negative doctor to neutral. And just want to encourage your audience with that. If you can relate, most of you probably can. Do not be afraid to engage those negative and make sure you're checking all the boxes with every deal. Because if you're loose in one category, it can have a cascading effect for your territory and your business.
What was the magic in getting that doctor from adversarial to neutral? How'd you do it?
That's a great question. I was selling a large capital piece of equipment. Two of the other physicians were on board with it. There's some advantages clinically. I think from him, it was wanting, a lot of times they want to be involved in the process. They want it to feel like it's their decision as well. So I think for me, what it was after I went one-on-one with him back and forth, bringing him up to date with the clinical justification. And then his peers really wanted this piece of capital equipment as well. And getting him to understand that there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve, a different feel for him. However, that the outcome would ultimately be very similar, if not exactly the same for him, was really what I needed to overcome. And honestly, it was just having a physician look at you in a rude manner, speak down to you, not be happy with you, and get their negative attitude up to neutral at least. And will you at least pass this from your side of things? Will you give this a nod? If not even for you, will you give your peers this opportunity to experience this equipment?
Okay.
And I think that was, in a nutshell, touching the head and the heart are often those two things. And a lot of times, from a head knowledge standpoint, you need to have white papers, you need to have clinical justification to back up your emotional pull on these physicians. And that's kind of what I always try to do. I try to match clinical with emotion.
Yeah. And it resulted in behavior change. And lo and behold, here we are.
We're here.
I want to shift gears a little bit. A lot of reps just don't know where they want to go in their career. They don't know necessarily how to identify what they want and then where to go to get it. How do you help people? And I know you must have had these conversations as a sales manager, because I know I do, and I don't manage anybody except my brother, and he's fine. But I have conversations with the reps all the time, and I you have to step back and say, what do you really want? Do you really want to be a manager? I mean, I don't know that I'm hearing that, but you want something different. How do you help people identify what they want professionally?
Yeah. And first off, that's normal. I think that's more normal than not. I still struggle to this day. What exactly do I want in certain areas, right? And I think reflection back to the morning time, kind of taking time to think and jot down pros and cons on a piece of paper or journal your thoughts is an area of help. One area I do every year with my team, in anytime I'm starting a new team or being part of a new organization, it's what are the strengths of each team. And so I love the Strength Finders assessment because it kicks out your top 34 strengths and stack ranks those from best to worst. And what I try to do is I try to listen. I try to be there for my team. I try to understand what they want. But when I understand their strengths, I can typically help double down and focus on those. And then I think you can naturally see the career progression within organizations from there. When you know how a person's hardwired, and, and like you said, do you really want to be a manager? Is that is dealing with people and dealing with employee challenges something that you want, or is it just you're trying to make more money and you're currently unhappy in your existing role? I think mixing the facts with listening, and then I encourage my reps and my team to, they don't need to be an author or anything like that, but jot your thoughts down, journal your thoughts, get them out on paper, because when you know how you're wired and you know what you're kind of thinking through right now, it can kind of help guide your next career steps.
Yeah. And I think that saves people enormous amounts of personal frustration in their career, because they may think they want something when they really don't, because it doesn't play to their strengths. They get it, and then they really struggle, or they even fail. And now they don't know where to turn or where to go. And I like that process, help them understand where they want to go, identify a process to get there. And then these very simple words are so motivating to me, because I've heard Grant Cardone say them over and over again, is take massive action.
Yeah.
Let's talk about taking massive action.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just getting started, right? And for those reps that don't know where to go, you try to line them up and then take action. You can always pivot at some point down the road, but action, 10x action. I'm glad that you and I both love that as well. When you take 10x action, it makes everything else fall in place for you as a rep. So, organize, then attack. So organize your territory, have an idea where you want to go, and then go at a 10x level. If you think what you're doing is 10x right now, you probably could ratchet it up a tad. And you don't want to be shotgunning and running around like a chicken with your head cut off. Be taking such big action that if a deal doesn't fall through, your pipeline is full enough to where you just backfill it with something else. And so I found in medical, stuff can get delayed for all kinds of reasons. Capital budget, there's a physician issue, someone leaves, you name it. And so even more in medical device, it is so critically important.
You touch on something I thought was a powerful story about Dabo Swinney, coach of Clemson, what he was doing prior to getting a head coaching job. And you also mentioned what you were doing prior to getting promoted into sales management in medical devices. Can you outline kind of those processes, or what you were doing to kind of prepare yourself for a role that, at that point, there was no promise that you'd even get?
Yeah, good point. Good question. Dabo I really learned this from him, where he wanted to be a head coach at one point. And what he did, I think it was 7 or 8 years before he even became a head coach, is he created a binder full of all the plays that he would run: offense, defense, special teams. He even had the kind of character and attitude he'd want from his team. And so I was so encouraged by that when I heard it. He talked about like blooming where you're planted. So wherever you are today is what I would encourage the audience as well, is bloom where you're planted and be excellent in your current role and start thinking ahead. And a lot of times we get so caught up in doing as salespeople that we don't take enough time to step back and create. And so that would be my encouragement to your audience is, listen, if you want to be a manager someday, start now. Start reading leadership books. Start creating your personal playbook for your career and in your life. And it doesn't have to be pretty. It could be a 3x5, could be on a Word document on your computer. But start thinking through the gaps that you have currently and the areas you want to improve in, and start writing your philosophies. And if you hear a good quote, write it down and just focus on being excellent now and thinking ahead.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think people will take plenty of notes away from this conversation. And again, want to encourage people to pick up the book. You can get it on Amazon. It's called Relentless Sales. You can visit Jon's website at jonalwinson.com. We'll link to that in the show notes. Jon, thank you for being on today. Thanks for giving your time again, a second time around. Your stuff is so popular and it's helping a lot of people. And I just really appreciate you being on as a guest.
Yeah, Jordan, thank you, man. Thanks for your friendship. Love everything you're doing and really enjoyed it. Appreciate you having me.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us on the Chase MedSearch podcast. I hope that you gained some helpful insight from today's episode. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes, and give us a like on your favorite streaming platform. It really helps grow our audience. For more information on Chase MedSearch, visit our website at chasemedsearch.com. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time, I'm Jordan Chase, and this has been the Chase MedSearch Podcast.